There is a silence that hangs over the northern plains of Mesopotamia, a silence older than the empires we remember. It is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of erasure, a place where a forgotten kingdom once thundered across the world on hooves of bronze. Long before the rise of Assyria, before the iron fist of Babylon, a mysterious power dominated the ancient Near East with a secret weapon. They were called the Mitanni, a people whose name now barely echoes beyond the crumbling tablets of dusty archives. You might walk across the sun-scorched hills of modern Syria today and never suspect that you tread above a lost capital. No great pyramid marks their achievement. No standing temple announces their glory. Only a whisper of horsehair and dust carried on the wind. Yet for nearly 3 centuries, the Mitanni kingdom stood as a colossus, a bridge between the great civilizations of Egypt, Hatti, and Mesopotamia. Their mastery was not carved in stone alone, but bred into the sinew and heartbeat of the most revolutionary animal companion humanity had ever harnessed, the chariot horse. Steam rises from the flanks of thousands of conditioned horses, animals trained through a system so advanced that it would shape warfare for a millennium. This was the furnace of a technological revolution, a silent engine of empire that allowed a relatively obscure population to intimidate pharaohs and rival kings. The story of the Mitanni is not merely a tale of a forgotten kingdom. It is a ghost story about the fragility of human memory itself. Today, if you search for their capital city, the fabled Washukanni, you will find only a question mark drawn across a sprawling desert. Historians cling to a single manual, a clay tablet uncovered not in their homeland, but in the ruins of a rival capital, as the fingerprint of their genius. We know the Mitanni existed because the great kings of Egypt wrote to them, their letters baked in the Amarna archive, pleading for chariots and royal brides. Those fragile cuneiform tablets reveal a kingdom of immense diplomatic weight, a power broker whose princesses sat on the thrones of the pharaohs. Yet the language of those letters was Hurrian, laced with strange words that did not belong to that soil, terms for war and horsemanship that pointed to a distant origin, words for the wheel, the horse, the warrior. They echo a tongue of the steppe, a trace of an Indo-Aryan elite who may have once ruled a native Hurrian populace. A patchwork of theories suggests these elite charioteers galloped into the river valleys, long ago, their foreign names fading into the local tongue over generations. But the physical remains of their civilization are infuriatingly sparse, buried under shifting floodplains or pulverized by the boots of later empires. If you hold a real artifact from their era, it is often a small cylinder seal, its engraved image frozen mid-gallop, a chariot hunter aiming a bow at a fleeing stag. The stone is cold, but the carving screams of velocity, of a culture that worshipped the raw kinetic power of the horse at full charge. Their legacy was not architecture. It was motion, and motion, by its very nature, vanishes the moment it stops. The darkness of the Mitanni puzzle deepens when you approach the mystery of their capital, the city of Washukanni, a name that translates to something like pleasant sanctuary. For over a century, archaeologists have scraped the earth of the Khabur Triangle, searching for a single monumental gateway that confirms its location. Deep trenches have revealed statuary and administrative records from the Assyrians who came later. But the Mitanni layer remains like a stubborn ghost just beneath the surface strata. It is as if the sanctuary itself took the kingdom's name literally and sealed its gates against the future, vanishing into the groundwater of the river valley. The silence is maddening because contemporary records describe Washukanni as a glittering urban prize, a city sacked and burned during the wars with the Hittites. The Hittite king Suppiluliuma boasted of his devastation over the Mitanni heartland, a campaign so thorough that it effectively shattered their political spine. Yet even in destruction, a city should leave bones, a shell of melted brick, a refuse pit full of broken pottery. Yet here the void only laughs at our radar scans. It is in this archaeological vacuum that we turn to the one thing that could not be burned, the knowledge of the horse itself. It is not a poetic legend. It is a grueling interval training schedule, a scientific protocol spanning 184 days of conditioning for chariot horses. Kikkuli's instructions are terrifyingly specific. He prescribes alternating periods of walking, trotting, and galloping over custom-built tracks, cooling down with water baths, and feeding specific rations. He even commands the horses to be massaged and washed with warm water after their exertion, an almost tender act of mechanical precision aimed at creating a biological superweapon. The vocabulary was so specialized that the Hittite scribes had to borrow entire Mitanni words to translate it, words for the lap, the turn, and the interval. When you read the tablet, you are listening to the ghost of a civilization that understood the physiology of a beast well enough to conquer an unforgiving landscape. Here is the labyrinth. Who were these people really? And how did a small kingdom acquire the biological equipment that terrified the superpowers of the Bronze Age? A logical hypothesis suggests that a wave of Indo-Aryan charioteers, perhaps fleeing the collapse of complex societies in the East, formed a warrior aristocracy over the native Hurrians. They brought with them the lexicon of the horse, the composite bow, and the light-spoked wheel, a trinity of warfare that rolled over the old heavy-wheeled battle wagons like a storm. Yet another, darker hypothesis suggests the Mitanni were not conquerors, but indigenous innovators who cracked the code of steppe technology through trade and desperate military necessity. The evidence for the elite theory lies in a treaty between the Mitanni and the Hittites, where the gods invoked include Mitra, Varuna, and Indra, pure Vedic deities alien to the Mesopotamian pantheon. Standing in a vast museum storage room, looking at a plaster cast of that treaty, you feel the gravitational pull of two utterly separate worlds colliding invisibly. Where did those Vedic gods go? They evaporated from the written record as the Mitanni state collapsed, absorbed back into the vast tapestry of Hurrian religion. The labyrinth tightens when we consider their collapse, because the fall of the Mitanni is as opaque as their rise. The official story is simple. The Hittites attacked, and later the resurgent Assyrians swept away the remnants under Adad-nirari, burning the fields and carrying off the gates of their cities. Climate scientists suggest a darker hand at play, a prolonged drought in the Khabur Basin that turned the fertile sanctuary into a dust bowl just as the armies arrived. Pollen cores from the region tell a story of withering agriculture, of a fragile landscape tipping into famine, leaving the Mitanni horses starving in their stables before the enemy even breached the walls. Other experts point to internal division, to the eternal contention between the Hurrian commoners and the dwindling Indo-Aryan elite, a kingdom that tore itself apart just as the wolves circled. We have found no royal tombs, no lavish burial of a chariot king, no golden bridles like in the steppes, just a scattering of administrative seals and a mention of a bridge nobody can find. The people did not disappear. Of course, the Hurrian population lived on as a substrate in northern Syria for centuries, speaking their language long after the state died. But the specific high technology, the structured breeding programs, the specialized grammar of Kikkuli's training, that precision was simply switched off. It was a flicker of genius that fell into a dark age, and the secret of the superhorse slid back into the barbed wire of nomadic legend. Without a central authority to manage the complex logistics of feed, water, and breeding, the chariot corps itself likely dissolved into bands of mercenaries serving new Assyrian masters. Thus, the greatest power of the Bronze Age became a mute subcontractor, its language a ghost in the stables of a rising iron empire. The hunt for Washukanni continues, not just for pottery, but for the missing narrative link that connects the sophisticated horse lords to the anonymous dust of the tell. Every summer, teams return to the Khabur with ground-penetrating radar, hoping the limestone foundations of a stable will reveal themselves beneath the mudbrick collapse. They search for a single seal reading King of Mitanni, a trash pit with discarded Kikkuli tablets, a scrap of tack that proves the mechanism of their power. The landscape itself seems to conspire against them, because the tell sits ominously close to the volatile border tensions of the modern Middle East, a zone where mythology and geology intersect dangerously. It is a cruel irony that a kingdom dedicated to fluid motion is now buried under the static weight of geopolitics, its secrets held hostage by a landscape that has seen too much blood. How do you recover the memory of speed from a static mound of clay? That is the question that haunts the archaeologist in the dry nights of the excavation house. We are faced with a reality where the hard evidence may never match the historical importance of the subject, a kingdom that exists mostly in the letters of its enemies. When the Assyrian scribes describe the conquest, they speak of taking vast numbers of horses and smashing the chariots, acknowledging the value of the prize even as they erased it. But even the Assyrians, who were meticulous record keepers, never tell us where the capital truly lay. Maybe because its location was too obvious to mention, or perhaps because they wiped it so clean they never cared to say. The human element of this story is bound in the obsession of the searchers, the lonely souls who spend decades trying to reconstruct a horse breed from a handful of verbs. There is a particular madness in opening a Hittite bookshelf and finding a single Mitanni manual, a lonely testament to a dead colleague who still whispers instructions across the millennia. Kikkuli himself, a man careful enough to count the days, but not vain enough to detail his own life, represents the ultimate anonymous inventor stolen by history. We know him only as a voice of command, a tone of rigid authority over the watering and exercise of silent beasts, a voice that stops abruptly at day 184. What did he feel watching the collapse of his kingdom? Did the training grounds fall silent before he could finish the final chapter of his work? The weight of the mystery falls on historians who must become detectives of absence, tracing the negative space around the chariot tracks in the sand. They lie awake at night, these scholars, haunted not by what they have found, but by the specific scent of hay and leather that they will never smell. The sound of the chariot axle they will never hear. The Mitanni challenge the very arrogance of the modern mind, forcing us to confront the fact that a superpower can simply slip out of the historical frame like a horse vanishing into a wall of dust. Obsession takes a physical toll. The failure to locate a throne room becomes a physical ache, the corruption of a single tablet fragment, a wound that never truly heals. It is the great equalizer, this enigma, reminding us that whatever power we think we hold today will one day be just a layer of silt beneath a hotter, drier wind. Some nights, when the generator fails in the excavation camp and the stars wheel overhead, the difference between the archaeologist and the vanished groom disappears entirely. Both are servants of the horse, one feeding barley, the other dusting off a bit, both trying to hold back the relentless night of forgetting. The Mitanni are not dead as long as a single mind asks how they trained the gray mare on the shattered cylinder seal to gallop so perfectly into the abyss. Their story exposes a raw nerve in human psychology. We crave ruins, solid stones to touch, because we are terrified of histories that are purely kinetic, purely animal, purely breath. Without a monument, the mind struggles to validate the memory, and so the Mitanni flicker in a liminal zone between authenticated fact and a campfire story told by a Hittite guard. Time reveals all things, or so we tell ourselves as a comfort against the void. But the plain of the Khabur laughs at that comfortable lie. Sand covers the track, wind erodes the hill, water dissolves the clay, and the horse dissolves into the skeleton, and the skeleton into the soil, and the soil into the silence. The enduring enigma of the Mitanni is a mirror held up to our own mortality. A civilization that mastered the ultimate speed of its age could not outrun geological time. You might ask yourself what it truly means to be remembered, if all it takes is a century of political chaos to turn a king's name into a curse pronounced incorrectly by barbarians. The kingdom of the thoroughbred horse has been reduced to a linguistic artifact, a ghost in the syntax of an extinct tongue, a borrowed word for interval in a grave. Perhaps, though, there is a strange victory in this absence, because by leaving us nothing to stand on, the Mitanni have become infinite in our imagination. They are not limited by a fallen frieze or a collapsed colonnade. They are the pure concept of speed, of biological alliance, of the moment a human first felt the surge of 1,000 pounds of muscle at full gallop. In that sense, they never stopped moving. They simply shifted from the physical step to the neural pathways of everyone who hears a horse in the distance and looks up. The wind blowing across the mound of Tel Fekherii carries the same dust that choked the Hittite scouts, the same dust that Kikkuli cursed as he watered his animals. We are separated only by attention, because if you stand there in the deafening quiet and listen, the thrum of the hooves is still buried in the vibration of the land. To study the Mitanni is to worship not the God of the archive, but the God of the gap, the divine unknowable space that keeps the universe from being a closed book of brittle facts. We will likely never find the royal stables. We will never read the missing chapter of the training manual, and we will never glimpse the face of the last king who threw his chariot into the fire. And yet, that is not a defeat, it is an invitation, a vast dark plain stretching out before the lamp of our knowledge, inviting us to ride not to a destination, but into the depth of the mystery itself. The forgotten kingdom is not forgotten in the wind that carves the Khabur, nor in the heavy breath of a sleeping horse, nor in the human heart that refuses to stop asking why. Sleep well, and when the dream of hooves returns, as it always does, remember that you are riding the memory of a lost world that still refuses to be entirely silent.